that to sell the program to the world. So in terms of the number of people who can come to Canada as a visitor, we respond to demand. If a person wants to come and work for up to 6 months for a foreign employer from Canada under this program, they're going to be able to do that, but we don't set a limit on it. The limit on the number of people who will be able to transition to a work permit will be driven by the number of people who receive a valid job offer. So this is going to be driven by the market. If there's one lesson I've learned over my time in this portfolio, it's that decisions are going to be made far more effectively by the people who use the system, not by the people who administer the system. If we can empower the players in the market to make decisions about what makes sense for them, both in terms of coming and living and working in Canada temporarily, and in terms of who's going to hire the professionals that come, I think we're going to have a better result. So we're going to try this out, we're going to see how it works, but my sense is we're going to have some tech workers show up that otherwise wouldn't have as a result of this policy.
Thank you, Minister.
Sarah Deschamps, the Canadian Press. We've seen a wave of layoffs across the tech sector, including in Canada, but worldwide, and I'm sort of curious why you're looking at easing some of these immigration pathways at the same time as that's happening.
Yeah, one of the things that is really important is that we take a long view of the impact that our decisions are going to have on the well-being of Canadians and on the Canadian economy. When I chat with anybody in the tech sector, they tell me, A, the number one obstacle to growth that they have is finding the talent that will allow them to scale, and B, if we have tech workers here, companies will come here as a result of the opportunity to recruit workers into their workforce. So despite the fact that we might see short-term layoffs, and not as significant in Canada, by the way, as certain other jurisdictions, we're going to have an opportunity to build a workforce that's not only going to be able to move laterally to fill jobs that might be open today, including amongst people who've recently been laid off, but we're actually going to be creating a pool of talent that's going to set the stage for more companies to call Canada home in the long term. So when I think about the 10, 20, 30-year horizon, rather than the next few months or even the next election cycle, there's no question in my mind, having more talented tech entrepreneurs and professionals in this country is going to be a very good thing half a generation from now. And the flip side of that coin, if we choose not to embrace the opportunity that this moment represents, we're going to miss out on what could be a generational opportunity to pursue economic growth in a sector of strategic importance to Canada.
Thank you, Minister.
Hi there, Jennifer Herrera from CTV News. Just a couple of questions. Curious as to whether you have any numbers in terms of how many people a program like the Digital Nomad program is expected to help. And then to sort of repeat an earlier question, I think it was from Brendan, about the rollout. What can we expect in terms of that Digital Nomad program, in terms of when it'll be launched?
So the Digital Nomad program would enable people who could actually come under that opportunity to work for a foreign company but come and visit Canada already. There's already a program in place as well for people who receive a valid job offer to transition to a Canadian work permit. So under the Digital Nomad strategy that we're adopting, people could actually arrive in Canada today and start to take advantage of that opportunity. Just on the question around specific numbers, this is going to be driven by demand. So people who want to come and work and spend their money in Canada are free to do that. They, of course, will have to come under the ordinary rules for visiting Canada. Some countries will have visa-free access, others will need to apply for an ordinary visa. But once they're here, they'll be able to work for their foreign employer. And if they're here and receive a valid job offer, the number will be driven by the demand rather than an artificial limit set by government. The situation with the related announcement that we made today around the H-1B visa is a little bit more different, and we wanted to specify the number of people because there are approximately 400,000 H-1B visa holders in the United States, and we want to make sure that we create an opportunity for a number that we can more appropriately manage to test out this new idea. So we're setting a cap on that new stream for H-1B visa holders at 10,000, and that program is going to launch officially on the 16th of July.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Minister. Eduardo Harari from La Portada, Canada. I wanted to ask you in regards to the students that are here studying in colleges, foreign students that don't get the chance under some jurisdictions of Ontario particularly, that their programs don't qualify them for a visa in Canada to work. How are you going to address that as a government to try to keep that talent not from the part in Canada because of lack of attention to co-op programs?
So there's a couple of different elements to the answer to this question. And the answer for some students may not be the same for other students because, for example, not every institution has access to a postgraduate work permit. So indulge me for a minute and I'll try to explain. First, we made a change last year that was going to extend the number of hours an international student could work while they're in Canada. That was driven by the need to respond to an acute labor shortage that we were feeling in the moment, and we're going to have to examine the future of that policy as we get closer to the end of this year. In my engagement with students in the institutions they study at, or the employers that have hired them, the work experience they're gaining while they're a student sets them up for an opportunity to continue to work after they graduate in many instances. For those institutions that have eligibility for the postgraduate work permit program, that is the best way to remain in Canada and continue to remain on a pathway that will get you to permanent residency one day. We've run into a unique challenge as a result of certain pandemic-related processing delays because we had so many applications in the system when the borders opened back up, because we continued to receive applications throughout the pandemic when the border was closed. This put us in a situation with so many more applications. The score under the Express Entry, the CRS score under the Express Entry system was very, very high. It still is very, very high because we had so much talent in that pipeline. As we continue to conduct draws, I anticipate that number will probably creep down a little bit in the months ahead and over the next number of years as we continue to process more applications. And we wanted to make sure that the people who would normally qualify for permanent residency in May a couple of years from now don't lose out on that opportunity because of the temporary inflation in the CRS score. So we made decisions to extend access to the postgraduate work permit so more of those Canadian-educated, highly talented individuals could remain in Canada. We do have a challenge when we go forward in terms of trying to accommodate all of the students who want to live in Canada and become permanent residents. We will receive somewhere in the ballpark of 800,000 to 900,000 study permit applications this year. We're moving to 2025 to have 500,000 permanent residents. If we had permanent residency for every international student in this country, we would not be able to do it under our existing immigration levels plan. So there will be some international students who do not transition to permanent residency or potentially have temporary status for a longer period of time. But we're trying now to identify pathways for international students that will get them on the journey to permanent residency earlier in the process. If we can identify those people, maybe at the time they're applying at the first place or while they're a student, if they show great promise or a likelihood that they will qualify for permanent residency, we'll be able to do a lot more to set them up with an opportunity to transition to PR more quickly after they graduate. So it's a mix of the increase to hours that we've made for students to give them some experience and familiarity with the job market, extensions to the postgraduate work permits, and the new pathway that we're going to have to establish pursuant to my mandate letter that is going to help create a pathway to permanent residency for international students, potentially earlier in their journey than currently exists.
Thank you, Minister.
Hi, Amanda Jerome from Law 360 Canada. This is an exciting announcement, but given that we have now immigrants from war-torn countries and places of conflict like the Ukraine and Afghanistan and Sudan, do we have the resources to take this on? Are your resources going to be able to take care of the tech side as well as the promises we've made to people coming from areas of conflict?
The answer to your question is yes, and we don't have an option to give up on our humanitarian efforts in order to pursue these opportunities in tech. But we also need to do a better job of recognizing that refugees who come to Canada land with a whole lot more than what they're carrying in their bags. These are talented people. Look at the tech professionals who've come from Ukraine under the Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel. We actually launched a new federal pathway just a few weeks ago that I find incredibly exciting because it has a chance to change the global narrative on the value that refugees provide to our communities. Look, I come by this perspective honestly. My hometown where I was born is called Antigonish, Nova Scotia. Have you ever heard of the company Peace by Chocolate? The very first Syrian refugee to come to my home province opened a chocolate shop a 1-minute walk from the hospital where I was born. He was largely welcomed and supported by the community, but he faced some xenophobia as well. He's told me before that one of the first conversations he had involved a young guy in the community who told him that he felt badly that his family lost everything, but he didn't think he needed to come to his town to take his job. that was the first person he hired on the floor of the factory that now has dozens of my neighbors working full time in paid work in rural Nova Scotia. The reality is I've met people who've come through a new program we've established, the Economic Mobility Pathways Pilot, that's actually creating opportunities for us to bring in vulnerable workers as economic migrants. There are people who work for Shopify who are amongst their top 10 employees globally in cloud computing who've come through this program who happen to flee war-torn jurisdictions. So we do have to continue to process humanitarian applications. And this is the fourth year in a row, by the way, as of a couple of weeks ago, UNHCR recognized Canada as the country in the world that has resettled more refugees than any other country in the world. Through the pandemic, we were responsible for resettling more than 1/3 of the total number of refugees that were resettled globally. At the same time, we broke every record for economic migration in this country. We can walk and chew gum at the same time, and we have no other option because it's so dramatically in our interest to do both. And this plays out not just over the next number of months, but over the course of generations. And I think we're going to see that we'll be very, very happy to have maintained our position as a moral leader on refugee resettlement as we embrace the most ambitious immigration levels for economic reasons at the same time. I think we can do both.
Thank you, Minister. We have time for more questions.
Hi, Mohammed from KMPR. I was wondering what you think immigration looks like post the 2025 election if the government changes and or if it stays the same.
I don't think much about the government changing. I think about doing my job well enough that we get a chance to continue doing this job. The reality is we're blessed in Canada because there is a multi-partisan consensus, so far as I can tell, that immigration is a good thing. Now, we might have more ambition when it comes to immigration. Our levels of immigration have doubled, more than doubled, between the time when we formed government and the chart that we're on for 2025. We resettled the year before we formed government about 240,000 new permanent residents. In 2025, we're looking at hitting 500,000. The reality is there is a difference in approach, but we don't have some of the existential debates that some of our competitor jurisdictions do. There's one party I've seen outwardly adopt an anti-immigration policy in Canada, and they don't have a seat in the House of Commons. That's the People's Party of Canada. I think Canadians have come to understand that immigration is not just a nice thing, it's a good thing. And when you have the opportunity to do the right thing and serve your self-interest at the same time, you come to understand that this is the kind of policy change that I would expect would survive successive governments of different party stripes. But in the meantime, I think my role is to do my job well enough that we have an opportunity to continue to do this from the government side of the House of Commons after the next election.
We have about 5 minutes still available, so if you get your hands up, we'll get some more questions for the Minister.
All right, round two. So I wanted to ask you as well. So you mentioned and I'm going to get this wrong, the H-1B visas from the U.S. Obviously, you said that was intended to kind of take advantage of all the layoffs that had happened in tech in the United States. There have been significant layoffs in tech in other jurisdictions around the world. China is a particular example the last couple of years. Would your government ever consider expanding that program to include other countries besides the U.S.? Obviously not H-1B visas, but same spirit.
I understand. So it's a little bit challenging to say in a blanketed way that we can do the same thing for other jurisdictions. Keep in mind that there's a lot of commonalities between the United States tech market and Canada's tech market, including employers that sometimes have locations on both sides of the border, including the fact that everybody who comes in on an H-1B visa has a level of language skills that would allow them to succeed in life in Canada. So there's certain opportunities that exist within the North American market that make it easier to try out. But if this works well, and we find other jurisdictions that have similar strengths, we'd leave those options on the table. We obviously don't have an announcement to make today, otherwise we would have made it beyond what we've already included. The other thing that's unique about the North American market, the H-1B visa has an interesting feature that requires a person, if they do lose their job, to leave the country after 60 days if they don't find a new job. There's a particularly short-term opportunity for Canada because there's a lot of people who over the course of their careers may not have considered coming to Canada but very much want to stay attached to the North American market, potentially with the hopes that someday they can return to their old job in the United States. This relative level of integration in the North American tech market, I think, is going to serve in the long term both Canada and the United States interests. But in the meantime, if people want to come across the border, work for a Canadian company, and potentially transition to a more permanent status over time, we're more than happy to have them come and work and make a contribution here.
Hi, Minister. Murad Hamadi at The Logic. You just mentioned people who work for companies that are on both sides of the border, multinationals, probably US Silicon Valley firms that have operations in both places. Have you had any conversations with any of those companies about this new program and the prospect of them bringing some of their H-1B workers up to Canada under this new program?
Yes, although the conversation the conversations that I've had with companies or their representatives and conversations that our department officials have had with stakeholders in the same space has not been limited to the H-1B visa concept. So I've had a series of tech roundtables as part of the strategic immigration review that we've recently completed, and the report I expect will be published in the short term. But one of the things that we heard loud and clear was needing to facilitate intra-company transfers across borders. What we see when companies are thinking about making big investments, they want to have reliable access to talent. But sometimes they already have that talent, and they find it very frustrating that they can't simply, even for a short period of time, have a cohort of workers who are working on a very particular project come from one jurisdiction to another. That's something that the H-1B visa policy is going to potentially help, but it's not the only thing that we can do. So as we go forward, we're going to be looking for more opportunities to permit intra-company transfers, particularly when we're dealing with players in the industry who work on a project-by-project basis rather than a steady stream of work for a long time. I had a meeting not that long ago in Vancouver with animation studios. Things get hot and dry when they're dealing on a particular motion picture that's going to hit the big screen, and they know the month after their competitor is going to have a need, and they're happy to have that fluidity amongst their workforce. If we expand the opportunity for people to borrow from their own workforce in other jurisdictions, we're going to dramatically increase the opportunity that Canada benefits from the growth that these companies who are currently bidding against one another within their company globally. If we can use intra-company transfers to promote Canada as a destination, we're going to receive significant dividends. But the H-1B visa policy will potentially help, but there's more that we can do on that front as well.
So we have time for one more question.
I guess I've answered all of them. This is way better than the House of Commons, guys.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Look, thanks everyone. I really appreciate your interest. Take care.